What happened in Charlottesville this weekend didn't just randomly occur. It was a very predictable culmination of one of the most disgraceful years in American political history. When Donald Trump announced his candidacy, his biggest political achievement was leading the birther movement, which questioned whether President Barack Obama was born in America. Trump launched his campaign by scapegoating Mexican immigrants and even comparing these so-called bad hombres to criminals and rapists.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
From day one, white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups had found their man and rallied around Trump's campaign. This was well documented and indisputable. Instead of acting responsibly and relegating Trump and his crackpot supporters to the fringe, CNN and MSNBC gave Trump perhaps the largest platform with the biggest megaphone in American history. This serial liar with neo-Nazi supporters received $3 billion in free media, and he was the ubiquitous presence in our homes for nearly 2 years. The networks loved Trump because he made them money. People would tune in to see his racist rants, and the networks would convert those eyeballs into advertising revenue. To make a short-term profit, the media checked its ethics, surrendered its moral authority, and ignored the unsavory and often violent elements that created havoc at Trump rallies.
Fuck political correctness! Fuck political correctness! Build that wall!
Islam, baby. Islam. Fuck them. Fuck Islam. God bless Donald Trump.
You don't come and talk about America when you're supporting Muslims.
Our president has divided this country so
Yeah.
badly.
Fuck that nigga.
There's a group out there, just throw him the hell out.
Get the fuck out of here.
Get out. Get out.
The warning signs were there. On August 19, 2015, two lowlifes beat a Hispanic man with a pipe in Boston while yelling, "Donald Trump was right and all these illegals need to be deported." But the corporate media continued to prostitute itself and pretend this was an anomaly rather than a fixture of Trump's campaign. Instead of harshly condemning Trump's frequent attacks on Muslims and Latinos, the media tried to explain away his rougher edges. Trump was a regular on MSNBC's Morning Joe, which repeatedly allowed the reality star to use that platform to set the day's news agenda. While Trump often received favorable news coverage, Hillary Clinton was routinely savaged for her emails, and Bernie Sanders was mostly ignored. CNN, however, was the worst of all. They should have dropped most of their Trump coverage for the good of America. Instead, they saturated the airwaves with this bigoted blowhard. They degraded their news operation by hiring Trump apologists, which offered nothing, such as Jeffrey Lord, Kyla McEnany, and Corey Lewandowski. These apparatchiks spun Trump's constant lies and excused his overt racism. They normalized his bigotry and turned this hate-mongering millionaire into an everyday man of the people who just wanted to bring back their jobs in the coal mine. The media played with fire. And this weekend, America was burned as the white supremacists and neo-Nazis inspired by Trump's victory felt secure enough to come out of the closet and parade in a liberal college town like Charlottesville. Republicans are also partially responsible for what happened in Charlottesville. They have long considered racists just another constituency. And Donald Trump knows they are his base. This is why he pathetically failed to condemn the neo-Nazi violence in Charlottesville, saying it was, quote, an egregious display of hatred and bigotry and violence on many sides. That statement, if you think about it, is the triumph of Fox News, which has perfected the art of false equivalency with its propaganda slogan, fair and balanced. Fox promotes the big lie that there are two legitimate sides to every story. So if they have gay pride, to be fair and balanced, you must promote straight pride. If you interview an advocate for Black Lives Matter, to be fair and balanced, you must promote a racist from Blue Lives Matter or White Lives Matter. This is how Fox promotes bigotry while giving itself plausible deniability. I've heard many Republicans make the false claim that the racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia displayed in Charlottesville is not real conservatism. I guess that's true if you conveniently ignore history and have amnesia. Barry Goldwater, the godfather of the modern conservative movement, voted against the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. Richard Nixon rolled out the infamous Southern strategy, stressing the code words law and order. What it really did was exploit racial tension so Republicans could take over the South. It was an overwhelming success, with the so-called red states now all voting Republican. Nixon also targeted minorities with a phony war on drugs. Last year, Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, told Harper's, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." When Ronald Reagan won the Republican nomination, he kicked off his presidential campaign at the Neshoba County Fair in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Real pleasure to present to you Governor Reagan, Governor.
This town was the site where 3 civil rights workers were murdered in cold blood in 1964. During a speech, Reagan unforgivably told the crowd, "I believe in states' rights."
Devote myself to trying to reorder those priorities and to restore to states and local communities those functions which properly belong there.
George H.W. Bush embraced family values Republicans and let the infamous haters Pat Robertson and Pat Buchanan spew bile from the 1992 Convention Hall in Houston.
Like many of you, last month I watched that giant masquerade ball up at Madison Square Garden, where 20,000 liberals and radicals came dressed up as moderates and centrists in the greatest single exhibition of cross-dressing in American political history. A militant leader of the homosexual rights movement could rise at that same convention and say, Bill Clinton and Al Gore represent the most pro-lesbian and pro-gay ticket in history, and so they do. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself. But this war is for the soul of America. And in that struggle for the soul of America, Clinton and Clinton are on the other side, and George Bush is on our side.
He also ran the infamous race-baiting Willie Horton ad.
Bush and DUKAKIS on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. DUKAKIS not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. DUKAKIS on crime.
In 2000, the George W. Bush campaign, led by Karl Rove, helped place 11 referendums on ballots to ban LGBT marriage.
Today, I want to explain why I support the Marriage Protection Amendment and why I'm urging Congress to pass it and send it to the states for ratification. Marriage is the most enduring and important human institution. Honored and encouraged in all cultures, and by every religious faith. Marriage cannot be cut off from its cultural, religious, and natural roots without weakening this good influence on society.
The idea was to mobilize conservative voters, mostly in swing states such as Ohio. All 11 bans passed, and George W. Bush was reelected. Let's also not forget that Republican presidential candidates lined up for years to speak at Bob Jones University, which banned interracial dating. It wasn't until George W. Bush took flack for his appearance in 2000 that Republicans stopped bowing down to this racist school. Modern conservatism is a scam that rich whites perpetrate on poor whites. It's a bait and switch, where wealthy Republicans stir up the base by creating minority scapegoats. The white rubes then come out to vote en masse for Republicans, but once in office, they generally ignore the rubes and give massive tax cuts to themselves. But these fools never catch on. The latest version is Trump's refrain, "Drain the swamp." When he was elected, however, he filled key positions with swamp dwellers from Goldman Sachs. The greatest distillation of conservative strategy came from the late political operative Lee Atwater.
Is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
And even after all the advances in civil rights and the election and re-election of Barack Obama, Confederate monuments still dot the South. This changed on June 17, 2015, when white supremacist Dylan Roof murdered 9 African Americans praying at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Those defending Confederate monuments call it their heritage. They are correct, but it's a heritage of hate in the service of slavery. These monuments are trophies to traitors who rebelled against the United States of America. The only place for these plaques to prejudice are in a museum, where the hate and bigotry can be put in historical context instead of celebrated in the public square. The fireworks in Charlottesville began over anger about plans to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. I personally think Lee's monument should be replaced by a statue of Heather Heyer, the counter-demonstrator who was murdered by Nazi Alex Fields Jr., who rammed his Dodge Challenger into a crowd, also injuring 19 people.
Go, 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 go.
Donald Trump's flaccid reaction to this Nazi violence is a pockmark on his presidency. By not standing up to his base, he has debased the office. Indeed, former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke said, "We are going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump." That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump. Since 2001, there is an average of more than 300 violent attacks a year in the United States linked to right-wing extremists, according to a study by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. Since 9/11, jihadists have murdered 95 people in the U.S., while right-wing extremists have killed 68 people. What happened in Charlottesville was an act of terrorism. Where the hell is Trump's war on terror now? We don't need a brown war on terror, we need a war on all terrorism, and that includes his base.
You will not replace us. Hail victory. You will not replace us.
They thought we wouldn't stand up. Guess what? We're standing up for our rights. We're proud to be white.
We're proud to be white, brother. Proud to be white. We're proud to be white. Hail victory. Get out of here, you commie scum. Don't touch me. White lives matter. White lives matter. White lives matter. White lives matter. White lives matter.
Trump also needs to clean house with the stain on his legacy extending to staff. His chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is a white nationalist. Another key advisor, Sebastian Gorka, is tied to neo-Nazi groups in Hungary. This is completely unacceptable, and if the president does not want to get blamed for the right-wing violence, he needs to begin by firing these extremists. It's time the conservative movement stops tolerating those who spread intolerance. They need to be crystal clear and remove these haters from their base. And the media should stop giving coverage to politicians who pander to undesirable right-wing elements. Enough is enough already. This is Wayne Besson for today's Daily Reality Check. Have a great day.